What's happening, everybody? Are coaches starting to have some buyer's remorse when it comes to paying players, or are they being more strategic? Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yeah, what's happening, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along on today's show. Recent comments from Brian Kelly, Hugh Freeze, and Josh Heupel showing what coaches are really dealing with when it comes to NIL. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to Everydayers. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network covering your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. Download Game Time, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, let's dive into it as we've got some interesting storylines going on around the SEC. And we're going to start with Hugh Freeze over at Auburn, as some interesting comments made by him yesterday on the tail of Brian Kelly's comments earlier in the week, and Josh Heupel also chiming in. So let's start here with Hugh Freeze. On Wednesday, he was on the McElroy and Kublik show. Actually, it was Thursday, but nonetheless, the headline that grabbed, or the quote that grabbed all the headlines, couldn't bring myself to spend $1 million on the transfer portal. Here's what Hugh Freeze said. The options that you're presented with when it comes to possibly paying $1 million for a quarterback through the transfer portal. He said, our options were continue to develop Payton Thorne, continue to develop Holden Geriner, develop Hank Brown, Walker Howard. He said, or go spend $1 million on this guy. I just couldn't bring myself to do that because I wanted to put all the pieces together. Payton Thorne obviously did not have the best first season at Auburn last year. They believe he could turn that around. More on that later. But it's an interesting position here. An opportunity to spend $1 million on a transfer quarterback that could potentially be an upgrade. If Auburn is spending $1 million on a new quarterback, of course, that's a lot of money invested in just one guy. And you think of where Auburn was able to upgrade this offseason. They brought in 14 transfers, including Penn State's leading receiver, Keandre Lambert-Smith. They brought in Georgia State's leading receiver, Robert Lewis. Of course, the big five-star recruit, Cam Coleman, who I'm sure is getting some kind of NIL deal. So, it's like if they allocated that money elsewhere, that might be the better way to go. Here was Hugh Freeze continued. He said, I've watched Payton Thorne's Michigan State stuff 1,000 times. He had 2 NFL receivers, and he was pretty dang good. There's a lot of things that should be 50-50 balls, and you got to have a guy that can do that. I think Dre Lambert, he's a 50-50 pass catcher. Obviously, we're excited about the other guys we signed. So now I'm not saying I won't do that in time, meaning pay $1 million for a quarterback, but he said just currently, I think who we have in Payton Thorne, this guy's proven. Now, the big rumbling that was out there was Auburn perhaps could have had a chance at signing quarterback Cam Ward. Of course, he spent 2 seasons at Incarnate Word, threw for 4,600 yards and 47 touchdowns in 2021. Spent the last 2 seasons at Washington State, where he was very productive. Hit the portal this offseason and ended up at Miami. And it's no secret, Miami is spending on adding a bunch of guys through the portal and recruiting. But, I think the question is this, and this is posed to Auburn fans out there. Do you think Auburn would be in a better spot with Cam Ward at quarterback right now than with Payton Thorne? I think it's a slight upgrade, right? I mean, just track record of Cam Ward. Now, again, if Payton Thorne plays more like the guy that was at Michigan State, then I think Auburn's going to be just fine. But hold that thought, because then we have LSU and Brian Kelly, who made comments earlier this week. We was quoted saying the Tigers are not in the market of buying players. And that comes on the heels of LSU trying to add a difference maker at defensive tackle in the portal. And Kelly said, if you just want to get paid, this is not the place for you. Now, he did go on to say, and this is where the headlines take away from what was actually said, or what else was said. And he said he acknowledged NIL is, quote, a part of this. He just said we're not in the market of going out and buying players. He said, unfortunately, right now, that's what some guys are looking for. They just want to be bought. Basically, what Brian Kelly is saying here is, they still want to sell guys on the football thing and, development. And it's just really interesting because defensive tackle was at a premium in the transfer portal, and LSU was looking for a couple of big ones. Dominic Williams from TCU, Simeon Barrow from Michigan State. and they missed out on both of them. Glenn West of Go 24/7 said, I think what Brian Kelly's really saying in his remarks is that NIL can be one of many factors that makes LSU an appealing place, but it won't be the most important one. See, LSU's more than willing to play ball in the NIL space. Just look at their 2025 recruiting class. But Brian Kelly wants to build the program through the high school ranks, and NIL opportunities are reflective in his current roster and his freshman recruiting. Kelly went on to say, we'll develop you, we'll get you ready for the next steps as we did with Jaden Daniels, as we did with Malik Neighbors, as we did with Brian Thomas. We developed 3 defensive linemen that all got drafted this year. We'll do that again. And this is where this whole thing gets kind of sticky, right? Because think of Alabama. Nick Saban didn't need to dole out tons of money in NIL to attract transfers. He could sell kids on going to come here and compete for a championship, get developed for the next level. Brian Kelly just put 3 kids in the first round of the NFL draft, including the Heisman Trophy winner, Jaden Daniels, who he brought to LSU through the portal. And so I do think that this should still be part of it, right? Like, instead of a school like LSU or Auburn or Florida having to go out and, quote, buy a kid from TCU or Kent State or Arizona State, like, shouldn't some of these SEC schools be enough to sell a kid? Like, put it this way. If CJ West went and got, I don't know, let's just say he got $800,000 to go transfer to Indiana, and LSU was offering $500,000. Okay, great. He got paid more. But what if he goes to Indiana and he ends up being, I don't know, a 5th or 6th round pick? Whereas if he was at LSU playing against tougher competition on a bigger stage, he showcased a little bit more and ends up being a 2nd or 3rd round pick at LSU. He's going to make a lot more of that money on the back end, over an immediate payday in NIL through the transfer portal. I just think, like, it should be the other way around. Like, instead of LSU, Texas, and Oklahoma getting into a bidding war for Dominic Williams, like, it should be those schools should be offering, hey, we'll give you $50K to come here. And it should be like, I don't know, the Indiana's going, hey, here's $200K, come play for us. Like, they should be the more desperate ones. The SEC schools shouldn't be desperate for a kid from Kent State. And just to kind of continue this thought, J.D. Piquel tweeted out from On3 Sports. He said, truly believe this method of NIL is going to prove to be the most sustainable when it comes to what Brian Kelly said. He said, you attract what you allow. And it sounds like LSU is working to attract guys that prioritize ball. He said, Kelly isn't saying LSU can or won't play ball in the NIL space. He's just saying the main thing is the main thing when they look to add talent. Shea Dixon went on to clarify. He said Kelly's comment on defensive tackle was a response to some spring portal NILs that are higher than anyone's on roster. It was very thin defensive tackle transfer portal group. And then our buddy Matt Moscona chimed in. He put this on Twitter. He said, Dominic Williams was asking for a 7-figure NIL deal that would have made him the 2nd highest paid person in the program behind Brian Kelly. He said the LSU's collective could have paid that price, and in my opinion, they wisely did not. The offer LSU made Simeon Barrow would have matched the highest paid player on the team, and he ultimately chose Miami because Miami, upped the ante. So it's just very interesting. Like, look, the guy's also got to be a fit too. I think the bigger problem with this spring portal was, these kids could have a higher asking price because positions were at a premium. Hey, you need a defensive tackle. There's only 3 or 4 or 5 really good ones out there, and I'm one of them. Hey, I have a higher asking price. But I do think it does have to come into the conversation. Are you a fit for our system? And look, we're not going to pay a defensive tackle who's never played a snap in the SEC. We're not going to pay you the most NIL over our current guys, right? Like, if anything, Garrett Nussmeier should go, hey, how about you just throw me a couple extra NIL bucks and I'll make sure we get, a couple more touchdowns throughout the season instead of bringing in a defensive tackle and giving him $1 million. One more thought on this. Tennessee head coach Josh Heupel was asked Wednesday evening ahead of his Big Orange Caravan stop about Brian Kelly's comments. He said, look, there's a lot of different layers to the cake that's getting baked. At the end of the day, we want guys that want to be here, that it matters, but are looking for the type of culture, environment, playing style, development as a man, not just on the field. So all those things go into ultimately trying to bring the right people inside the building. And I think those comments from Heupel are kind of what Brian Kelly was trying to say. Again, the headline was, we're not in the business of buying players. No coach is saying that, really. Every coach is willing to play ball, but it's got to be the right fit. And we can't overextend. We can't overpay for a kid that, we don't know if you can play here or if you're even going to be our best player. Now, look, it's different with the 5-star quarterbacks. I think that's well worth the investment. Going and paying Nico Iamaleava big money, look, high hopes for him, and you expect him to be the next great thing at Tennessee. But, if this were a quarterback you were going to get from Toledo and he's asking for $2 million, that's where I kind of go, I don't know. So, look, it's going to be a story that's not going to go away anytime soon. I just find it pretty fascinating, the conversations, and it's interesting that the coaches are kind of pushing back a little bit, saying, look, we have no problem paying players, but if we're going to do it, it's got to be the right kid. We're not going to overspend just out of desperation because I'm thin at safety. I'm going to overpay for a safety because you're one of the few good ones in the portal. Like, do you fit our scheme? Hey, let's talk football. Are you interested in developing? Are you interested in becoming a first-round pick? Are you interested in playing the SEC? I just think all that kind of stuff has to go into it as well, instead of, hey, here's my asking price, pay it, and I'm yours. And then on the top of it, some of these NIL kids or portal kids that you're paying NIL money to have turned out to be busts. LSU had a few. Auburn's had a few. Florida's had a few. Just because you make, you write that check for $200,000 or $300,000 and the kid gets there and he can't ball, bad investment. There's no refund. You can't get refunded for that. All right, more here on Locked On SEC. Thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. Coming up next, we'll get to the latest portal news, a few more portal moves we will get to in just a sec. But first, this episode is presented to you by our friends over at the Game Time app. Look, Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, the MLB, and they make getting playoff tickets even faster and easier for those NBA games. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off, and they got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time is going to take the guesswork out of buying those NBA tickets. Again, last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sporting events. They have flash deals. You could save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats. And all-in pricing. I love that feature because it literally shows your total up front. No surprise fees at checkout. You know exactly what you're paying. Go take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. And remember to keep the Game Time app for college football season. They have tons of NFL and college football games on there as well. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. Come on back on Monday. We'll be recapping all the action from the weekend. Hey, if you've been watching Fox Sports or ESPN and tired of all the shouting, make this switch over to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. You can find it on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. All right, let's jump into it. We got a few nuggets to get into going on around the conference, so let's do that.
Boots out to the right. Takes the handoff. What a catch!
Around the conference.
And we start over at Texas as their latest transfer portal commitment, coming with some rivalry side of things. Jermayne Lole, a seventh-year college football player, entered the portal last month, and he had initially verbally committed to continue his career at Oklahoma. But on Thursday, Lole decided to switch sides in the Red River rivalry, Red River shootout, I still call it. The former Louisville defender is now heading to Texas. And this comes on the heels, right, of Oklahoma adding Dominic Williams from TCU. So now Lole switches from Oklahoma over to Texas. It was over 6 years ago. He was a three-star strong side defensive end coming out of Long Beach, California. Got a late offer from Arizona State, signed with them. Made an early impact as a freshman at 3 sacks, 27 tackles. But it's a good get. More depth for Texas on their defensive line, which loses, of course, Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat. They lost their D-line coach, Bo Davis, switched over to LSU this offseason. But they got some pieces there. Jermayne Lole going to be on that D-line, listed at 6'3", 310 pounds, giving Texas some size up front. Meanwhile, over at Alabama, they jumped into the spring transfer portal to get a commitment from defensive back DaShawn Jones. Spent his first 3 seasons at Wake Forest. Comes over to Tuscaloosa as a redshirt junior with 2 seasons of eligibility remaining. On3 Sports saying he was rated a 3-star prospect coming out of high school. Did not play during 2021. Took a redshirt and extended his eligibility in 2022. Played in 12 games. Became a starter in the second half of their season. And as a redshirt sophomore, 37 tackles, 27 solo stops. So Kalen DeBoer getting a secondary that, of course, lost Terry and Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry to the NFL draft. Trey Amos transferred over to Ole Miss. So they went to the transfer portal. And they bring in Keon Sabb, transfer from Michigan. Cam Howard, transfer from Charlotte. Domani Jackson, DB from USC. And now they add from Wake Forest, DaShawn Jones. So we'll see what he is able to do there in that secondary for Alabama. Over at Auburn, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but Hugh Freeze talking to the media earlier this week about his quarterback Payton Thorne and said, point blank, I'm a believer in Payton Thorne. He said, obviously I know quarterbacks, they're either going to take praise or criticism. There's nowhere in between. He certainly has had his good and bad moments, but I do believe with better pieces around him, he's got the ability to be a great leader and a really solid quarterback in the SEC. I think he senses more of a cohesiveness in the staff and what we're trying to do that fits his skill set, so hopefully that will translate into him playing more confidently. I mean, obviously they added a lot of wide receivers. We talked about it already. Cam Coleman, the 5-star stud freshman, and then Dre Lambert coming over from Penn State. We will see if their new quarterback coach, Kent Austin, will have an impact as well. Hugh Freeze talking about him said, look, Kent, he said, I get a lot of credit for the past play of the quarterbacks, but truthfully, it really should go to Kent Austin. He's the best quarterback coach I've ever been around. He and Dan Warner are both as solid as they come. I think he's really going to help that whole quarterback room with their development. So we shall see what Payton Thorne does. But to me, that's one of the biggest storylines in the SEC this year. If Payton Thorne can rise to the occasion and have his best career season, Auburn's going to be a problem for some people. They're going to pull off some upsets, win some games they're not supposed to. But if they don't, well, it could be a long year and a lot of question marks on Hugh Freeze going, why in the world, in this world of transfer portal and NIL and all this, you came out and straight up said, we're not paying $1 million for a transfer quarterback, and you stood by Payton Thorne, and this is what you got? Again, my hope is for Auburn that it does work out. Payton Thorne does play well, but if he doesn't, get ready, Hugh Freeze. You will take the brunt of the storm there. All right, 24/7 Sports put out their college football's 15 toughest schedules in 2024 and ranked them. Just want to run through some of the SEC schools they had on this list. And first up at number 15, we start with Alabama. They said Kalen DeBoer, his schedule at Washington in 2024 would have been equally difficult in the uber-competitive Big Ten that they're joining. 14 of the preseason top 15 teams for 2024 are from both the SEC and the Big Ten. But they think that Alabama's schedule pretty tough. They got them ranked 15th out of 15. Coming at number 14, they got the Georgia Bulldogs. They say you'd be hard-pressed to find a tougher road schedule than what Kirby and the Bulldogs are tasked with, trying to overcome this season. They'll play away from Sanford Stadium 5 times, including a neutral site opener against Clemson. So going to be interesting to see what Georgia does with that tough schedule this year. Coming at number 12, they've got Kentucky. As 24/7 Sports says, first 2 weeks of their schedule are crucial for Mark Stoops and the Wildcats, who will entertain top-ranked Georgia in Week 3. Right out of the gates. Pretty tough. Number 8 on this list, they got Vanderbilt. They said the schedule simply does not let up for Clark Lee. They'll open against Virginia Tech and Nashville. And just a pretty rough schedule overall. I mean, look, Vanderbilt just playing in the SEC and playing an SEC schedule is tough every year, but even more tough this year. At Mississippi State, they say if your first-year coach Jeff Lebby overlooking a non-conference game against Arizona State and Toledo prior to your first SEC home opener against Florida would be a bad idea. Those are some tough teams, and like the number 1 team in this schedule ranking, the final few games of their season are incredibly tough against Tennessee, Missouri, and Ole Miss. Coming in number 4, we're into the top 5 here. They got South Carolina. They say Carolina's football schedule is always challenging, but one would think missing annual rivals like Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida for the first time in decades would make it easy on the Gamecocks. Well, no. South Carolina will have to host LSU and Ole Miss and travel to Alabama, to Oklahoma, and to Clemson next year. Also, that Week 2 road game against Kentucky. Pretty pivotal. Coming in at number 3 on the toughest schedules, they've got the Arkansas Razorbacks. So the schedule at Arkansas for Sam Pittman has been treacherous. Razorbacks travel to Stillwater for the first time in decades to take on last year's Big 12 runner-up in Week 2. They have to go to Auburn 2 weeks after that. And then they still have 4 preseason top 10 teams on the docket, including home games against LSU, Ole Miss, and Texas. Number 2 on this list, new SEC team, they got Oklahoma. So the Sooners only leave Norman once in September, but that's when the most difficult stretch begins if Oklahoma is able to get past Tennessee in their SEC opener. What follows is a road trip to Auburn, then 5 games against top 25 teams over the final 7 to close it out. They have a brutal late November with trips to Missouri and LSU. Pretty brutal. And then coming in at number 1 on this list is Florida Gators. They say the only team in college football tasked with facing 11 power conference teams next fall. The Gators have their work cut out for them, and consider it a hot seat year for Billy Napier. The brutality includes 5 consecutive games in November against top 25 opponents, beginning with Georgia and ending with ACC champion Florida State in Tallahassee. Florida's trip to Texas in November is sandwiched between the Georgia game and a home game against LSU. Absolutely brutal. And there you have it. That is 24/7 Sports ranking the toughest games, strength of schedule, and again, makes sense. A lot of SEC teams ranked on their top 15. All right, still more to come here on Locked On SEC, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. First, I want to remind you guys this episode is presented to you by our friends over at Monopoly Go. Like, if you haven't downloaded the app yet, flag on the play. Go download it now. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you'll unlock. And there's so much to get. They've got unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. They got cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends. Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win, or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench. Go download the app today for free on the Google Play or the App Store. It is game on when it comes to Monopoly Go. All right, roll along here. Locked On SEC. One more segment here, and had some SEC hoops nuggets we wanted to squeeze in here. So let's do that, shall we, as we continue on here. Locked On SEC. And Kentucky continue to put together their roster for their first season under Mark Pope. On Wednesday, they picked up a new commitment from an in-state prospect, Trent Noah, back in November, signed with South Carolina. Well, on Tuesday, Noah announced he had been released from his national letter of intent with South Carolina. Thanked Lamont Paris for the opportunity, but shared he was looking to play closer to home. And he wrote in a note, "To begin, I would like to express my gratitude to the South Carolina staff and fan base. After much thought, prayer, and extensive conversation, requested a grant for a release from my national letter of intent. Sincerely appreciate Coach Paris' genuine investment in me. Please respect my decision." Well, on Wednesday, Baxter, Kentucky native, announced he will begin his college basketball career with Mark Pope and the Kentucky Wildcats. He's coming off a standout season, the 13th Region Player of the Year. He averaged 29.9 points and 10 rebounds for Harlan County High, leading them to a 34-5 record. As a shooter, he was 56% from the field, made 43% from three, 88% at the foul line. He's 6'6", 200 pounds, rated a 4-star, the number 2 player in the state of Kentucky, number 25 small forward, and number 103 prospect overall. So Mark Pope and his staff, they've now brought in 9 new faces to their roster. It is a completely overhauled roster, and that includes Lyon County's Travis Perry, who signed with Kentucky, and 7 players out of the portal. It is a whole new roster there with Calipari gone and Mark Pope in. All right, over at Alabama, they're looking to line up a matchup with a key Big Ten program in non-conference play. According to John Rothstein, Nate Oates finalizing a deal to play Illinois in Birmingham during next basketball season. An official date has not been finalized, but the game would be played sometime in December. When finalized, a follow-up game would be played the following season in Chicago. Alabama coming off its first Final Four appearance in program history. The Tide were, unfortunately, just one of the teams that UConn took victim along their way to a national championship. But Alabama, they've had some nice non-conference games under Nate Oates in recent years, so this should be a good one. Scheduling somewhat of a home-and-home with Illinois, but bringing it to Birmingham and Chicago, pretty cool stuff. One other thing here I thought was interesting, Kyle Tucker of, who's he with? The Athletic, he tweeted out the All-Americans last year in college basketball. He said, here was where the top 10 consensus All-Americans ranked in the 24/7 Sports composite as recruits coming out. Kyle Filipowski, who was at Duke, he was number 4. Hunter Dickinson, number 43. Deron Holmes, 48. R.J. Davis, 50. Jamal Shedd from Houston, 214. Mark Sears, 218. Zach Edey, 436. And other guys like Tristan Newton, Tyler Kolek, and Dalton Connect were not even ranked. So just keep that in mind sometimes. When it comes to college basketball recruiting, there's a lot more misses up top and a lot more hits way down low. Very different from football in that realm, but pretty crazy just to look back at some of these kids that were studs in college basketball this past year. They were, a lot of them were rated very low in terms of coming out of high school as recruits. So just something to keep in mind there. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of Locked On SEC. Thank you guys so much for making us your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. Come on back on Monday and check us out. And hey, for your second listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's Locked On Sports Today. You can find it for free on Amazon Fire TV, the free Fire TV channels app, and on YouTube. I'm Chris Gordy. This has been Locked On SEC. We'll talk to you guys on Monday.